So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for coming out on a kind of blustery night for sure. Hopefully we'll all get home before the big snows arrive, if they are going to come. I do need a volunteer, because tonight is maybe the 6th or 7th in a series of 100 town halls that we're going to do around the 9th District. And if you wanted to take note of the number of town halls that the current congressman does, actual in-person town halls, let's say you could count it on one hand with 5 fingers left. But in any event, what we're doing with the town halls is kind of a simple format. After I'll just say a couple more words about myself, but then we're going to turn it over to you all. And what I need is somebody to record up here. We have some magic markers, because what we're going to do is get a good 10-15 minutes of input about what are the driving concerns, issues, and for that matter, ideas, things that you think do work, could work, should work in the area. And we're going to record them up here. And then, rather than me give a stump speech, primarily I'm going to respond to that, like what I think of that, what my ideas are in relation to it. And this is the format we've been using for our town halls. It's worked quite well. We've done it in Emory, at Radford, up in Dickinson County, in a little town called Clinchco. So if that sounds good to you, is there anybody who doesn't mind to write and can kind of get sometimes lengthy expository statements down to a few words, a couple of bullet points? Somebody willing to volunteer to try to do that so we can record your issues? All right, thank you.
I saw fingers pointing at me. Step up to the challenge.
Thank you so much. So just try to get the gist of what people say. So let me, go ahead, Betty.
Just as a quick moment, I would like to do a geographic survey.
Sure, that's great. How many folks are from Galax?
Galax.
Okay, we got a strong Galax contingent right here in Galax.
Fancy Gap. Duxborough. Hillsville. Independence. Breeze. And all of them.
All others.
Mount of Wilson. Grayson County, Elk Creek.
That's Graysonites, yeah.
Just to let you know.
Yeah, that's excellent. Great.
You already know that Twin Counties is huge.
Right.
And the 9th District
is huger. No doubt about that.
So thank you for that moment.
No, we are huge, you're right. That's our campaign slogan. We're coming up with a lot of campaign slogans. Maybe we can brainstorm some of them tonight too. So just a few more words. So as Jay said, I've been farming in Southwest Virginia for about 25 years. The last 18 years have been on an old tobacco farm where we raise organic produce just outside of Abingdon. I've always had a day job while I was farming, like most farmers do. And my day job for a while was I started and ran Appalachian Sustainable Development, which some of you may have heard of. It's in the kind of wood business, the produce business, the school gardening business, a lot of things. Before that, I actually worked for about 10 years on low-income housing. I was involved when the Pittston strike happened in 89-90, helping to bring in thousands of volunteers to support the miners. So I've done a lot of different things over time. But most of it has been focused on how do we build stronger economy and stronger communities in Southwest Virginia, in one way or another. Whether it was small business that I was starting or working with other buy local campaigns, whether it was farming. So that's kind of me. And I'll just say a couple words about why I'm running, and then we'll open it up. So I did run in 2012. I got my butt kicked, but the deal is that everybody else has gotten their butt kicked much worse than I did since then. So what I did was I took a lot more time this go around to consider whether or not I should run again, because the first time I knew I was not going to win, but I wanted to kind of get some ideas and issues out there and get some competition. Yeah, John?
Only got to swing 12% of the vote Anthony's way and he wins.
Only 12%. See, if you put it right, it doesn't sound like much. Good. But this time around, I really pondered on it a lot longer. We did a phone poll that had some encouraging elements, including the fact that the current congressman is quite weak in terms of his re-election number. So there were some encouraging things. And then I talked to people like Rick Boucher quite a bit and many others who felt that this was the year to give it a shot. So I'm all in. I'm phasing out my commitments to my business. I've kind of put the farm to bed. And so it's 100 hours a week on the campaign from this moment forward. But as we'll talk about at the end, I can work as hard as I want. Brooke Costigan, who's my wonderful field organizer and volunteer organizer from Marion. Brooke's terrific. If you volunteer for the campaign, you will be getting to know Brooke very, very well. But we can have a great staff and I can do a good job, but we don't have a shot unless we get a lot of you deeply involved. So we'll come back around to that. So that's enough of an introduction. Let's open this up now to your kind of big issues, concerns, whether they're very local, whether they're national or global, and again, some ideas as well.
Healthcare.
Okay, who said that? Okay, and any,
Healthcare is always a big issue around here.
okay,
It involves economics, it involves how many doctors we can attract, it involves whether or not our hospital will stay in Galax. It
Right.
involves how far people have to drive to even get the care of a doctor.
so it's healthcare, the big picture, but also rural healthcare, small town healthcare specifically. Yeah, okay, good, great. Others? Yes.
The wired road, that means
Connectivity.
Or lack thereof? Is that?
lack thereof.
Yeah,
You know,
okay,
fast internet.
right,
For business and healthcare goes into that.
absolutely, everything, right, good, thank you.
Employment opportunities.
Yeah, more job creation. Anything specific about that or just general?
Just think generally.
Less low-paying jobs and better high-paying jobs.
Okay, all right. So employment, but good employment. And how do we get there?
Education. Yeah.
That's certainly one of the pieces of it, for sure, yeah.
Aging population and services because of lack of jobs for younger people, and also it ties in with healthcare because aging populations need greater attention.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a couple things in there. So one of them is sort of the services and the needs of an aging population. Okay, and then there was something I didn't quite understand in terms of the connection between that and the issues with young people.
That is because young people cannot find jobs.
Oh, that's accelerating the age demographic there. Yeah, fewer young people means a higher percentage of older people. Right. Thank you.
Well, I'm just gonna throw out autonomous cars for public transportation.
Okay. Okay.
Autonomous
As in self-driving cars? Yes, for public transportation.
And the Grayson County Auto Mechanics Department is working on that.
That's
Autonomous cars.
That would also help with the aging piece too.
right. Although there's some employment implications with all of these technological advances as well. Yeah. Yeah.
We have a declining.
Challenging by spelling a ton of.
Oh, don't worry about it.
It's really, it's worse in some places than it is here. But, I mean, Grayson County is experiencing it more than Carroll County is, or the city of Galax. But if you get west of there, in Dickinson County and those places, there's a declining population. And it's because of all these factors that have already been mentioned. The health care, the job opportunities, our children, when they get out of high school, they're going somewhere else, and no one's coming in to replace them. And that lack of, that declining population is what's going to strain us. If we don't do something, if we can't think of some way to offset this, to turn it around, to at least break even as far as children. And one of the things that we have to struggle for is educational opportunities. If we got educational opportunities,
So a
we can
declining
attract
population.
a few adults, whether those people can stay. if we don't have those educational opportunities, then the kids are, the adults are not going to come here with kids in the first place.
Right. I mean, the population declines in the last 10 years in Buchanan County and Dickinson County have been severe for this percentage of the population. It's huge, and it's happening district-wide, and it's also heavily oriented towards younger people that are leaving, for sure. It's a big problem.
Has been on this,
Right.
about how we have to do, and I think, but our whole region has to embrace what's happening in the coal fields and say, this is going to happen to us if we don't make something different happen.
Right.
There's all kinds of energy opportunities that are here if we can get some capital and
Okay.
ideas.
Good. We got that. Yes.
Taking it a step further from what John said, my biggest concern in the 9th District is a lack of representation. We have not had adequate representation for the last almost 8 years. You know, our current congressman spends all his time in Washington. He sends his so-called representatives here. And how can he properly represent us if he's never even visits the area, which is the size of New Jersey, the 9th District? So that's my biggest concern for the area. I think if we need Anthony, we need him really, really bad. Now, we gotta address the fact that we just don't have a representative that adequately represents the people in this district.
We're
That's gotta change.
Or advocates for us.
Yeah.
Right.
right. And that belief I find going around the district is not just among Democrats. There's plenty of independents and Republicans who have been around long enough to remember what good representation was like,
They're all
and
affected by it.
they see it. Well, that's another question. Let's put that on the list. How are we going to get independents and Republicans to vote for a Democrat? How will we get independents and Republicans to vote for a Democrat? That's a challenge.
Trying to figure out how to say that. Just sway voters.
Sure.
Sway.
Callous hands actually working.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think if we focus more on the name Flaccavento rather than Republican or Democrat, I think we got a better shot at it.
Get the name recognition out there, yeah.
Yeah, although that name has its own liability as well. But when I was in Dickinson County in 2001, many times I was in Dickinson County in 2012, I took a long bus ride up into West Virginia with some UMWA miners in there because they were fighting a bankruptcy claim by one of the big coal companies. Anyway, I rode along for the day, and one of the miners, he looked at me and he kept saying, I can't say your name, but he sort of tried, and then he said, Sacapintos. So now in the coal fields, I'm known not as Flaccavento, but Sacapintos. Go ahead.
Renewable energy.
Renewable energy. More of it, I assume you're talking
I'm
about?
sorry, said what?
Renewable energy.
Yeah, wind.
Renewable energy, yeah. Yeah,
Solar both, wind and solar both.
great. Yes.
Need to rebalance a little bit the discrepancies between funding for the 9th District and funding throughout Northern Virginia and things like that. And of course, that comes with population, and I realize that, you know, the money is there. But at the same time, we're not being represented equally. You know, we're not getting the same opportunities that they have in other places in all of these regards because of that imbalance that's
Absolutely.
really, really out of.
And are you speaking primarily of education funding or all kinds of things?
Well, I'm probably speaking, being a former teacher of education, but at the same time, it's like in so many areas, it just seems like, you know, if you're choosing to live in this wonderful place that we have, then you also have to accept that the funding is not going to be there for all of those issues.
Yeah, so the funding imbalance, basically, education and other things, yeah. Let's do 2 or 3 more, and then then I'll start talking. Okay, let me go in the back first, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I'm concerned about student loan debt.
Mm-hmm.
Young professionals just really can't afford to live and practice in these rural areas with all the debt that we're encumbered with now.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
We'll put that under education.
Well, let's note it separately though, because that's
Perfect, yeah.
education's so big. So student loan debt relief.
And the reason I'm leaving some space, I'm trying to write big enough, but I'm leaving some space. What I thought maybe, thinking ahead, as you address these, put some things down that you speak about
Oh,
to address them.
that's an interesting idea.
In between there, that was my thought of, but I'll do whatever you want.
No, that sounds good.
So
Now I feel pressure to have something to say about
I
everything.
did not. Do you see these bullets?
No, that's great.
Student loan debt.
So student loan debt, just dealing with student loan debt. Great, that's great. Yes.
Substance abuse problems, especially opioids and meds and so forth, especially among our young people.
Yep. Very good. You got that, substance abuse. And do one here, and then we're going to wrap it up. Go ahead.
We touched on the environment as an economic driver with jobs, but we didn't really touch on conservation.
Right.
And with the other guy's support of coal fields and coal as a big employer, I'm really concerned about it. That and his stance on pipelines and his defense of them. It's kind of gross.
Yeah. So conservation and environmental issues. We might need a third sheet. Brooke, could you help just move some of these around? We can post them up on the wall.
Conservation, I'm sorry.
Conservation and environmental issues. Yeah. We could talk about a lot of different things there. Okay, last one. Go ahead.
Yes, and I'd like to expand a little bit on the jobs thing, because it seems to me that the jobs that one can get with just a high school education are more and more becoming automated. Robots, automation is replacing those jobs, so if that's all you have, you're in trouble.
Right, very much so. And actually, can I get away from this mic? I'm kind of a loud talker. Is that okay if I get away from the mic?
Can we add tourism?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Okay.
Right
Okay.
You're talking, that's fine.
Okay. This is it.
How about women's health?
Women's health. Okay. And all right. So we got tourism, women's health,
Health part,
and
reproductive rights.
the question of the availability of jobs to people without a college degree or whatnot. All right, so this is a heck of a list. I really don't know if I can touch on all of them in this amount of time. Let me say before I start talking that if you go to our website, we have not all of these issues addressed, but we have a sort of greater explanation of what I think the solutions to these problems are, or to these challenges, and that over time during the campaign, along with these 100 town halls, I'm brewing plans, Brooke is helping me with this, to have little mini summits with people that have more expertise than me. And I have certain areas that I feel like I know a little bit about, but plenty of other areas like drug addiction and opioids. I'm very much a lay person struggling to figure out and find the best solutions, and many others as well. So we're also going to be convening groups of manufacturers and innovators and new job creation. We're going to be convening groups of women around particularly women's issues, not only women's health and abortion access, but other things like the sexual harassment that we've been not recently dealing with, but recently finding out just how bad it is, and many other things. So keep that in mind too. If you have a particular area of expertise or something that you've really looked into, we'd love to have you feed into the campaign to just build my knowledge base, because I certainly don't have all the answers. But let me start with this, and maybe what I'll do, I guess I'll just go down the list. In some cases I might try to combine a couple of them just to respond. So in terms of healthcare, and I'm really glad that you framed it in terms of the challenges with rural hospitals and rural health delivery, because what I've been saying about healthcare, for me, it's kind of a twofold or two levels of response. One is a more immediate response, and that includes the fact that we've got to stabilize and in some cases reopen rural hospitals. We've had hospitals close in Patrick County and Lee County at a minimum. There might be others that I'm not aware of.
There's a clinic in Bedford that's about to
a clinic in Bedford. And that's the other thing I was going to say, is that clinics, I was very familiar with the one in Dungannon. I lived in Dungannon for a while, still going strong. But rural clinics, and for that matter, inner city clinics, are a very cost-effective way to deliver good quality health care. Kind of what now is being largely replaced by urgent care centers, which are okay, but they're not the same as a clinic where you develop long-term relationships with people. So in the short run, with healthcare, we should be, in areas like ours, investing in those rural clinics, making sure they're up to speed on both staffing and technology, reopening or stabilizing rural hospitals. And the third piece of the short-term health issue, in my mind, is the opioid epidemic. And again, I'm not an expert on that, but I've begun to look into the promising solutions, and it seems like there's two basic threads we ought to focus on. One is more emphasis on treatment than incarceration, and I think we're definitely moving in the right direction there in most places. But we we have a massive problem in terms of the number of people struggling with this, so we need to get more serious about treatment. And then we need to look at how to reduce and even close down the problem at the front end, at the point of overprescription or other ways that people become addicted. And just by way of an example, I found a little study of a group in Northern California. California is different from Southwest Virginia, but this was a 3 rural county area in Northern Virginia where they had tackled the problem of overprescription and overconsumption of painkillers. And they had a multi-pronged approach, including taking some of the highest profile opioids out of the allowable prescribed drugs. They worked with the insurance companies, the ones that had the highest street value. They did several different things like that, and in a 3-year span, they reduced the overprescription and overconsumption by almost 78%. So I'm not saying that's going to work everywhere, but what I am saying is that when it comes to that, I think we need to be looking immediately at much more money in treatment and less emphasis on incarceration. But in the long run, we simply need far fewer people getting addicted in the first place. We would all agree with that. And so some of that means a really holistic approach to stopping the overprescription and the other things that lead to that. Obviously, economic malaise and all those problems are another issue as leads to drug addiction, but we've got to deal with that. So the longer term with healthcare, besides those things, is I'm a complete advocate of a Medicare for all system, a universal healthcare. John and I were talking a little bit about this. I have a brother-in-law in Hendersonville, and he's a surgeon there, a really fine surgeon, and super well respected, but he's not somebody you'd ever mistake for a flaming liberal. He's very much a kind of an old-fashioned conservative, and a kind of a hard knocks, show me the money kind of guy. So he leans in that direction, and yet he is a complete and emphatic advocate of Medicare for all. He and his practice, they have to deal with both private insurers and Medicare and Medicaid. And he's no lover of government bureaucracy, but he has said to me, not only do you get much better access for everybody through a Medicare for all system, and not only do you get a more consistent delivery of quality of care, but from a health provider point of view, the Medicare, for all its bureaucracy, is so much easier to deal with than these private insurance companies. So you've got even people who are in the middle of the system saying this is the way we've got to go. So while we're fighting to stabilize rural health care delivery in the short run, I would be working with Bernie Sanders and many others to fight for Medicare for all. And of course, there's different ways to approach Medicare for all in terms of how you bring people in. But I loved one thing that John said to me just earlier today. I've been talking about this, and the way he framed it was that, look, it's working for old people who have the highest level of need and the biggest health problems. Why don't we think it would work for young and middle-aged people? And that's a great way to talk about it. I'd never thought of that. So hats off to John on that one.
I think the key, though, to a Medicare for All program is it has to be self-supporting. All right? Younger people are healthier, and if everybody paid in for the system, it would work. Yes. Younger people are healthier, consequently the insurance cost, the cost of health care is nowhere near as great as it is for us seniors. And a Medicare for All program really, really makes sense.
So we'll be pushing for that for sure. But again, it will take a while to get there, as we know, the legislative process. So there's plenty to do in the meantime in terms of health care, opioids, drug addiction, and all of that. Let me jump down a little bit to the jobs question. So we had a couple different things about the economy, jobs, the quality of jobs, and jobs for people that don't have a 4-year education. And let me just say to you, too, that the issue of robotics and IT, generally speaking, or AI, artificial intelligence, I read a book about 6 months ago called The Rise of the Robots, which sounds like a sci-fi novel. It's not at all. It's a very sober look at the pace of development. And one example that the author gives in there, which was shocking to me, because I come from a musical family and background, a classical musical family, was that apparently in 2012 or 2013, the London Symphony Orchestra premiered an orchestral composition that was composed entirely by a computer software program. Entirely. And it was very well received to the audience that didn't know that it was no human being involved in it. And he cites that as an example to make the point that it isn't just redundant, what we would consider kind of factory line jobs that are at risk or are being replaced now. My daughter just left a job as a production editor for a company, a publishing house in Philadelphia. In part, she didn't lose her job, but in part because they were outsourcing all of the copy editing and production functions to cheaper operations in India. So really, there are very few jobs that are not threatened by this, right? Now, there of course will be new jobs created in the process as well, but probably fewer and fewer. So that leads me to, if some of you have read my book, I know, and I won't talk too much about it, but I will say that the first transition I talk about in the book in terms of our economy that we have to make is a movement towards greater self-reliance and resilience at the community level. Because I genuinely believe that, because both there's jobs in that, but also the reality is the future is very uncertain. That does not mean that we can't have thriving, abundant, healthy communities. Even if we have lesser overall employment, if we build the communities we want through combinations of exchange, barter, and other things, but also just thriving communities, that's kind of a foundation. We really need to do that, and I believe we can do it. I know you all are doing some of that with the free market just down the road here in Independence, and there's folks doing a time bank in Abingdon. So those are little pieces of it. There are tool banks emerging. So there's a lot of things we can do to sort of insulate ourselves and make sure. You remember, many of us grew up talking about how, saying we were poor but we didn't know it. And that was because our communities, by and large, were much less driven by the amount of money we earned and more by our capacity to care for ourselves and our neighbors. So one element of my economic strategy is to invest in self-reliance and in resilience so that people can do more for themselves and communities can care for themselves more. I think that's absolutely essential. Now, beyond that, my basic job strategy, I was just showing John, we do little videos through the website, and our next one coming out is about the myth of trickle-down economics, which is an unbelievably powerful and false myth. But I feel absolutely certain that what we need to do is shift the kind of money we are essentially giving to the biggest corporations and the wealthiest people and invest it in communities. Invest it in job innovators. We have them all over the 9th District, people who are creating new technologies. There's a business in Bristol that is manufacturing the cylinders for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. They're at the cutting edge of this prototype because you need a specially strong cylinder that does that. There's a company in Radford, Virginia that's producing super energy efficient building panels that are also more storm worthy. There are amazing eruptions of new technologies that are solving some of our problems. We should be investing the heck out of them, helping them create and develop markets. We also should be investing, and we are, in the kinds of downtown revitalization that we're seeing in Galax, in Bristol, in Hayside, in St. Paul. St. Paul, a town of fewer than 1,000 people, right in the coal fields, has been in the process for the last decade of reinventing itself. And St. Paul has a craft brewery. It has a fine farmer's market. It has a business that's making furnishings from reclaimed wood. It has a trail system in the town and around the town. So there are a lot of examples of where we're redeveloping our downtowns, reimagining our economy. So when you think about investing in manufacturers and investing in downtown revitalization and then investing in job training so that whether or not a person has a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree or not, they can still get a skill set that allows them to be part of this emerging new economy. And that economy is going to be different in the coal fields than it's going to be in Carroll and Grayson County, than it's going to be up in Montgomery County and Allegheny County. But each place, the key is significant investment in local infrastructure, local businesses, and manufacturers. I'm absolutely convinced that we would see an economic renaissance if we redirected our money that way. Right now, we spend about $100 billion a year on state and federal incentives to lure big boxes and out-of-state companies. $100 billion a year. We spend a tiny fraction of that on small to mid-sized businesses and independent businesses. So that's kind of that. And I think the other part of that in terms of, we had another question about out-migration. So most young people leave for 2 reasons. The biggest one usually is jobs, the lack of good job opportunities. The second one is the amenities, the sort of cultural and other amenities. What we're seeing in places, many parts of the country, is that when you get not only job creation, but you get towns being reborn or reimagined. Again, even in St. Paul, we're starting to see this with young people who grew up there in Russell County moving back, or young people coming there who didn't live there. When you have craft breweries, when you have vibrant music scenes, when you have good internet so that people can connect in other ways, you really do get, if not a complete reversal, at least you slow the rate of out-migration. I think we have to remember how important the cultural and music and other amenities are to young people as well. Because the millennial generation cares as much or more about the quality of life than they do how much money they make, right? So I think our economic strategy also has to keep that in mind too. We need to recreate towns that are pleasant and interesting to be in. And that's a big part of how we're going to keep our young people or attract new young people. One example I quote in the book is some folks in rural Minnesota, an 8-county area, who worked on this but also stopped investing in subsidizing big boxes. They had a change of staff in a rural economic development agency, and they said, we're not going to give a penny anymore to trying to recruit big boxes to come in or pay a lot of money to Amazon to set up shop. We're going to focus on our existing manufacturers, we're going to find out what they need, and we're going to invest in them. And that's what they did. And over a decade, they more than doubled the jobs from 4,500 to 10,000 in their local manufacturers. Their total job growth in that 8-county area, because of the ripple effects of that, was 30,000. The average wage of the jobs went up about 20%, and they had been losing 2 out of every 3 young people once they graduated high school. They started keeping 2 out of every 3. So it's possible. That's the message. It's possible if we have the right strategy for investment. So that's a little bit about several issues there. That also gets to the renewable energy. I want to talk about that, and to the environmental question. So I'm an organic farmer. I'm a lifelong environmentalist. And at the same time, I'm a pretty blunt critic of the environmental movement of which I've been a part. But let me tell you why. Because what I think the environmental movement needs to be doing, what we need to be doing if we consider ourselves conservationists or environmentalists, particularly in rural communities like Southwest Virginia, is we need to be helping people find the solutions. How can we create sustainable livelihoods on the land? Whether it's organic farming, whether it's solar panels on strip mines, which are beginning to emerge, more so solar than wind, but some experiments with wind as well. There's a very fine winery in Wise County, Mountain Rose Vineyards, makes some of the best wines made in Southwest Virginia on old strip land. They figured out a way to get the vines started, and now 10 years out they have a very healthy, very productive, and very profitable business. All kinds of opportunities are emerging in that. back in the day when I was running Appalachian Sustainable Development, we started a vertically integrated sustainable wood products business that made hardwood flooring and trim and molding out of very well managed local logs. That business bit the dust during the peak of the housing crisis because of the prices plummeted, but it was up to that point a pretty successful business. But the point again is when we think of conservation and environment, too often, I think, we think of the bad stuff we do. The environmental movement tends to focus on stopping bad stuff, preventing people from messing things up, whether it's strip mining, whether it's fracking, whether it's clear cutting, and that's absolutely critical, especially when you look at climate change. But what if we put just as much time and energy into thinking about how can we help the people who live closest to those resources live well on that land? Because right now, the fact of the matter is, most farmers, most hunters and fishermen, commercial and otherwise, certainly most loggers and miners and drillers, they hate environmentalists. And yet an awful lot of those people, coal miners, an awful lot of them are avid hunters and fishermen. And they love the outdoors. But we've created an economy that's based on extraction and sort of collateral damage elsewhere. And so we've made enemies of people that we need to make allies of. And I think we do that not by pretending that climate change isn't real or something ridiculous like that, but by investing in the alternatives that are going to allow people to have good livelihoods on the land rather than extractive. That to me is a sea change in how we approach these issues, and it's happening, right? Okay, that's another piece of it there. So let's talk now a little bit. And of course, I didn't say too much about renewable energy, but the other piece of renewable energy besides, we're already seeing a small, it should be bigger, but a small growth in renewable energy jobs. I would love to see us attract a solar panel manufacturer, or as they've done in Salem, a company that makes parts that are related to. In Salem, they make parts of wind turbines. But even if we're unsuccessful in that, I think we can spur solar development. And I think one of the things we all need to push for at the state level is for Virginia to allow for community solar. Right now, they don't allow it in Virginia and Tennessee. But with the states that have allowed people to buy into community solar arrays, where it's not dependent on an individual structure, they get much faster growth of solar. You get more solar bang for the dollar spent. Lots of good reasons. So we need to be working on that as one element of as well. And energy efficiency. There's huge job potential in energy efficiency. If we have time during the Q&A, I'll tell you a couple stories about that. Yeah, John.
Has there been much emphasis on switching the coal-burning power plants over to natural gas?
That's happening all over the country, even in the coal fields, even in Appalachia, absolutely.
Because, retraining the coal miners to lay pipelines and that sort of thing and do the conversions to natural gas, which is, it's not perfect, but it's a lot cleaner than coal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty good debate about whether or not it's a lot cleaner. It's certainly a lot cleaner in terms of particulates, in terms of nitrous oxide. The question of its carbon impact is a more complicated thing, because when you factor in the amount of methane that leaks, it's not as clean as it appears. But yeah, there's that. But I'll tell you a story since you mentioned that. There's a group in southern West Virginia that I'm a big fan of called the Coalfield Development Corporation. They've created this intensive training program particularly for laid-off miners, others as well, which is 6 months of 40 hours a week. 33 hours are on-the-job training, and I think 5 hours are in the classroom and 2 hours are like life skills stuff. It's a very intensive program. They've focused on 4 areas. One is solar installation. A second is farming, particularly intensive farming like in high tunnels. A third is construction, and a fourth is deconstruction, where they're teaching people how do you take down old structures, salvage the materials so they can be reused and resold, whether for flooring, building, art, whatever. They have 100% placement rate at this point in living wage jobs because of the thoughtfulness and the intensity of their retraining program, one part of which is helping miners. Miners have a lot of skills. We have to remember that. We just need to put them into the right place. Yes?
I just got through spending a year in West Virginia, and a similar program I came across training was the option of what you just mentioned, plus further training in coal mining techniques. A great majority of the people that were miners took the coal mining training, and they did move over to the other side of things.
Who provided that training? Do you remember?
I don't remember, I can look it up.
Well, I mean, it's the fact of the matter is, just having been around a lot of miners over the years, there's some miners who would just as soon have another job if the wage was close, but there's plenty of miners who love mining. I mean, that is true. There's a camaraderie, it's a tough job, and you build a lot from it. So I'm kind of not surprised in a way that people do that. But retraining for certain elements of what they're doing now, again, it's the long run prospects for the mining industry, even independent of what's happening at the federal level, are not good. So a lot of miners are seeing that. A couple of your other things. Let's talk a little bit about education, and then as a piece of that, student debt. So starting with student debt. There is already a federal program. It's been around for a good long time. It's called I believe it is called the Federal Education Loan Forgiveness Program, something like that. And what that allows you to do is to write off some, not all, of the cost of your student debt by working for an approved employer. And an approved employer, AmeriCorps, Vista, and Peace Corps are all, but so too are 501c3 nonprofits and any public sector job. So if you work in a nonprofit that's doing healthcare or anything else in Appalachia or in Mississippi, you get that. You still have to make 10 years of payments, 120 total payments. But for people with massive debt, it is one piece of that. I would like to see that program dramatically expanded. I think we need to be moving. We have this over $1 trillion of student loan debt right now that's crushing students, that's leading people to live with their families, go back to their families, their moms and dads, take jobs they don't want to take, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot there, and I would like to see that basic student loan forgiveness combined with public service. That just makes a lot of sense to me. But the problem right now is it's too limited in scope, and there's still too much of a payment requirement, because you have to actually make those payments for 10 years before you can apply for the relief for the balance of your loan. I think we could shrink that time period. I think we could scale it more to your income level and your ability to repay. And so that's one, I think, solution, or at least an approach to student debt. Another is that in the long run, we need to move towards some form of debt-free education. Now that could be universal free 4-year education along with community college. It could be the kind of plan that the Clinton camp was floating with, that was developed by the Demos Institute, which is more a system where the federal government matches increases in state investment in college debt. So if the state is at this level of investment now per student and they bump it up to this level, then the feds come in and match that, which gives the state an incentive to do it. And the net result is that the total burden of tuition that students have to pay shrinks. So there's a number of scenarios out there, but we've got to deal with that. I mean, it's utterly insane what it now costs to go to school. And while tuition has risen so much, states have shrunk their contribution to it dramatically, overall. So, and Virginia is one of the states that now the state pays for less than 50% of the cost of tuition now. It used to be that most states paid 65, 70, 75%, so that the actual paying that the students did was a relatively small part. That's not the case. Education more broadly, my big things here are, first of all, Lori, my wife, was a public school teacher for 31 years, and so I'm a big advocate of moving away from standardized testing, pushing towards investing in creative and experiential learning. I mean, that works well for students across the learning spectrum. It works well for the so-called gifted kids. It works well for the kids with supposed learning disabilities. It works well pretty much for everybody in between. The reality is that, teaching to the test and teaching where we only sort of use abstraction, it's not lasting learning. It's the kind of learning you cram in, you do well on the test maybe, and then it's gone. Experiential learning, whether it's outdoors, in gardens or the woods, that kind of nature-based education, whether it's hands-on technical, all of that stuff is the kind of thing that I think has a more durable impact. So I'd like to see more of that, and I think the federal government can't mandate that, but it can model that, it can encourage that. And the other thing is, again, free community college and more investment in higher education. let's see, where are we? We're talking about declining population. I think we talked about that a little bit.
Tony,
Yes.
as you're talking, I'm thinking that connectivity would solve or certainly apply to almost everything that you've talked about.
Right.
Jobs, if we had decent connectivity, people could work from this area and not have to show up at an office. A lot of people do that, even in the area where they have good cable connection, good internet connection. It would allow people to set up shop here and sell online. It addresses the education issue. I just signed up for a full semester course in web page design.
Mm-hmm.
And it's free because I'm over 65.
Right.
So, I'm going to learn how to build a web page.
Right.
And other people could do that as well if they only had the connectivity. Even a healthcare issue can be addressed. with
Right.
it. Because, well, doctors can actually diagnose some things remotely. You don't even have to go to the clinic or the hospital.
So let me just say back, I about 80% agree with that. Let me just say this though, I'm 100% supportive of building on what Rick was doing until he got booted out, which is greatly expanding broadband. I also think it's a mistake, like so much, to think that the most efficient way to deliver that is always through private for-profit companies, because I think public utilities, not always, but sometimes demonstrate more bang for the buck, more value for the dollar. But connectivity is absolutely critical. And at the same time, if it's not part of a strategy where you're reinvesting in your community and rebuilding your own community's economy and capacity, there's every reason to think that over time, that connectivity will also facilitate even more jobs leaving the area. Because if you can get that information online so easily and so cheaply, maybe you don't need the local physician or the teacher or whatever. So I think we need a strategy in which the internet and online connectivity facilitates and supports a strategy of strong local economies. That still, to me, is the foundation, rather than one where it kind of doesn't matter where you live because you can do anything you want. I think it's important to build local communities first and foremost, I would say. Yeah. So I'll say maybe just two more things, and then let's just open it up to a conversation because I've been talking a long time. So a little bit about, I'll combine these two, the funding imbalance and the representation. So part of why we have a funding imbalance, particularly in education, is because the way that we've gone about education, is always that it depended on your locality and the relative wealth of the locality, property tax values and all that, and the state's investment. Well, in many communities throughout the ninth, the local tax base is shrinking. It's plummeting in many of the coal counties. And the state has stepped up a little, if at all, to fill that gap. So part of it's a state issue to do it. But also, I'm of the mind that what we need to do is start looking seriously at why couldn't the federal government fill in some of that gap? If the Wise County school system is here with their funding, and that's the most they can get out of local property taxes and state, and they need to be here, what would that influx of money, what would that gap financing mean to education and job opportunities in Wise County? And isn't that a national investment? Because if we don't do that, then aren't all of us taxpayers subsidizing the problems that come when people don't have adequate education? So I'm going to start to play around. I don't know the numbers, like how many dollars would it actually take to fill in those gaps? But I think we ought to put that issue out on the table. Why is that like something we never talk about, that the federal government could fill in that remaining 10, 15, 20% so that in Grayson County, Carroll County, Wise County, Dickinson County, they can have strong, well-paid teachers, adequate technology, and schools that don't leak? It seems to me something we ought to be talking about. So that's a piece of it. But in the meantime, I will say that the 2017 elections give us a little bit of hope in Virginia that we'll have a legislative body there that may be more open to addressing some of these funding imbalance issues, right? I'll wind up with this, and then if there's things I haven't brought up, we can talk about them in the general discussion. So probably the single biggest reason and issue I'm running is because of the lack of representation. And I'll tell you this, that when I was thinking about running, and I was having a conversation with Rick Boucher, and he was very kind to talk to me several times, and at one point we were talking, and it was a particularly bad week, and I said to him, why should I even do this? Because when I think about it, what could a sane person possibly get done in Congress? It's awful up there. And Rick said, well, you know, you may be right. It doesn't look very promising. He said, but even if you can't get anything done in terms of new policy in your first term or two, he said, what you can do as the congressman is you can really influence the path of economic development, of farming and agricultural development, of education, of technology in the 9th District. And he started rattling off. He said, think of all the federal agencies that are critical to the 9th District. The Appalachian Regional Commission, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Department of Commerce, the Economic Development Administration, Department of Transportation, Education Department. There are a lot of dollars flowing in. There's a lot of people employed whose job it is to try to make improvements in all those sectors. I'm lucky because particularly in economic development, rural development, and agriculture, I know a lot of those folks because that's been part of my work the last 3 decades. So Rick said, you know, you're in a great position to hit the ground running, and a congressperson can really steer the agencies, the staff, and the money to the most innovative, the most fruitful and productive investments that those public agencies can make. And he said, and what's more, you can have influence once you start doing that with the boards of supervisors and the town councils and the regional economic development agencies, because even if they're on the other side politically, they do tend to at least listen to the congressperson. What we have now is somebody who's so disengaged that you really don't have any idea what his economic development philosophy is, or what he thinks about food and farming, or what he thinks about education. We know pretty clearly where Mr. Griffith is on the big moral and ideological issues. He's consistent about that. But in terms of the sort of real-time, real-world bread and butter issues for people in the 9th, it's hard to know what he thinks because he just doesn't get very engaged. The single most important thing I would do is, building on the work I've been doing the last 32 years, is to get very engaged, not only with those agencies, but with local people, the kinds of people that make the Crossroads Institute possible, the entrepreneurs, the farmers, and others, and really use federal resources and ideas to help build on the good stuff that's happening. So I'll stop there, see if there's a few more questions, and then maybe Brooke and I can talk a little bit about our strategy to mobilize volunteers and money. Any more questions or comments before we move into the strategy? Yeah, so if you haven't picked up a copy of the Rural Progressive Platform, a number of folks from this part of the world, Kathy Cole most notably, but also other people got engaged with the process as we were going on. We wrote that over a period between the Trump election and this past June. And a big part of what we tried to do there was to reframe some of the big questions about the environment and the economy and community. Basically, here's the deal. Here's what I think. My experience is that the sort of intellectual, the kind of liberal idea that what we need to do to convert these people who are voting against their interests is what we all of us often say, is we just need to get them another study, another fact sheet. They just somehow they haven't gotten it yet. And here's the thing, that isn't working, and also people now feel very much that they're being talked down to, that they're being condescended to. And I understand that. And I understand very much the role that the right-wing media and Fox News have all played in convincing people of this. But fundamentally, what I'm not going to try to do is tell people that they're voting against their own interests or talk down to them or try to just give them fact sheets. I'm going to try to win their trust based on the fact that I too am a farmer and a working guy, and I think we have a place to start. And what I find all around the district is that not just farmers, but small business owners, working people, miners, and others feel like this is a Democrat that maybe I can listen to or I can talk to. because I think he kind of gets it. And so I think we've got a starting place in this campaign, and I will studiously avoid any sense, I hope, to people that they're being condescended to or talked down to. So I think we have to build this foundation of trust. I think the way you do that is by talking to people about the same issues that they care about, that you care about. I've had that experience. I had the experience I've shared in some other places of a gentleman in Russell County back in 2012 who was a retired miner who was a big fan of mine because he knew that I'd been there during the Pittston strike. He knew that I stood with the miners and that I was for the working guy, but he was otherwise a social conservative, as many are. And when President Obama came out in favor of gay marriage, it threw him for a loop. And he greeted me at my car as I was pulling up to give a talk in Russell County. And he said, "What do you think about that bombshell Obama's dropped on us?" And he started telling me about, gay marriage and gays and the Bible saying that it's an abomination. And I let him talk for a little bit. And then I just said, I hear all that. And said, but the way I read the Bible is the biggest thing it says is we're supposed to love people, especially people that are hardest for us to love. Our enemies, people that are different from us, people we don't understand. That's what I get. And he just studied on that for a minute and he said, "Well, I guess you're right." He said, "I guess they're just born that way anyway." And so this little moment of sort of supposedly a kind of impossible issue to bridge, we bridged pretty quickly in the parking lot in Lebanon, but we only bridged it because he trusted me as somebody who was with him on his basic issue of his livelihood, his employment. So I think if we can establish that foundation, I'm by no means saying I'll win everybody over. I don't intend to do that. But I think there's enough people who voted Republican this time, who voted for Trump, that can come over to our side, can be re-won by the Democratic Party once they understand that the Democratic Party is for them. Because right now, we've got a Republican Party that talks good talk about working people and ordinary people. But everything they do shows their undying love of the rich and powerful. Everything they do is about giving those who have so much even more. That's their whole governing philosophy. The problem is the Democrats have not been a clear enough and consistent enough different voice where working people wouldn't have strayed over there. And that's what I think we can do and I can do.
Anthony, how do you do that? How do you get the geese through the door so that they will, never mind trust you, just begin to listen?
That is like the perfect segue question. I appreciate that so much because that exactly gets to the heart of our strategy. That's exactly the heart of our strategy. So we are going to be doing these 100 town halls across the district. Like I said, we've done about a half a dozen so far. A big chunk of them, I can't give you a percentage, but at least half of them, we intend to be not with the choir. But we have people working in all parts of the district who themselves are Republicans or independents, or their co-workers are largely Republicans. And they are in the process of setting up opportunities for me to sit around somebody's kitchen table with a dozen people, or to go to the VFW and meet with 20 or 30 people, or to go and talk to the Rotary or Kiwanis and then meet with a group after that. The way we're going to do that is we're putting our feelers out to a lot, and I know a lot of farmers and miners that also are Republicans that are going to be opening those doors so that person to person, face to face, we can talk to a few thousand of people that are not part of our choir. Now that's not nearly enough votes, but our belief is that if we win over those ripples of people all over the district, that then they'll talk to their friends and neighbors and coworkers and the people sitting next to them in the pew, and they'll be essentially softening up the resistance to this Italian Democrat from Abingdon. That's what they're going to do. And I really think this will work. The fact that we got 39% in a 5-month campaign at the peak of the anti-Obama war on coal means to me, as John said, we only need to make up about 12%. I think we can do it. Now that also, let me say, strategy-wise, it's going to involve us also motivating the heck out of our side. Because there's plenty of young people who are very liberal-leaning. There's plenty of Democrats who are fed up with the whole process, who may not vote in an off year. There's plenty of people, I'm amazed, middle-aged people who have never voted because they consider politics to be a sort of disgusting endeavor, right? Many of that. That's true. So while we're reaching out to broaden the base, and we will be spending an enormous amount of time and energy on that, we also need to just absolutely get a tremendous turnout from our side. So we're not going to be ignoring our side. We have a staff person that's working just on young people and motivating them. Brooks, I'm going to bring her up now to talk about this volunteer strategy to get our folks engaged. But yeah, John.
One thing I want to say, I think the most important thing to avoid is the way we approach the opposition. When we use the word, we want to educate them, that is a real term.
Yeah.
Don't use that word, okay? They take that as we're saying they're stupid, and they don't know what they're doing. They just don't know it. You know, they don't get it. I think things like that have to be avoided.
And if you picked up those Roanoke Times, there was an editorial done, and then I did a op-ed piece. A lot of this thinking about how, what mistakes have we made as a party, and how do we stop making those mistakes and broaden our base are spoken to there. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
You counteract the Republican, I guess, media philosophy of you're just another tax and spend liberal. You don't care about God or guns.
Well, first you can go to the videos and see all the times I've shot my .22 at a watermelon or whatnot, so there's that. I mean, yes, so again...
Those seem to be the labels that have been placed on Democrats.
Absolutely.
Democrats aren't able to step away from it.
So I think the only chance, because I am going to get that label, there's no question, already some people are putting that on there. The only way we can do that is to get ahead of it by doing all of these House meetings, these town hall meetings, in which more and more and more people are saying, yeah, he's a Democrat, but he's different. And that's what has to happen, right? That's what has to happen. So that's like a good segue to talk about our kind of volunteer strategy.
Quickly.
Yeah.
If you bring extra copies of your book, I bought one when you were in Independence, and I turned around and immediately gave it away to a young farmer.
Okay, okay. I think we have maybe 2 or 3 of them. Yeah.
Okay, hold one for me.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I bought his book, it's great.
Thank you for these free promotional things. Your check is in the mail. Go ahead, Brooke.
Do you want me to use a mic, or?
If you want, yeah.
I'm kind of soft-spoken. Okay, can everyone hear me? I think so. So our volunteer strategy is to set up core groups within each county or jurisdiction across the district. And we've already done so. I know there's some Grayson County folks here, and the Carroll County folks have probably heard a little bit about it. We're setting up something similar in Montgomery, and we're reaching out to Floyd and Patrick. But basically how this works is these core volunteers are going to be people that are with us from now until the end. And they're people that can give just a little bit more time than the average volunteer each week or as the month goes by. And we look at all sets of skills, right? It's not just phone banking or canvassing. This core group is steering our directives and what they come up with as well in the county so that we can know not only what issues are important to the area that they're in, but so that we can be made aware of how we're affecting the people in those areas. And so, they can be writing letters to the editor, they can be trying to figure out strategies for messaging and how we can reach out to these independents and people that normally wouldn't be sitting around at a Democratic table. And so these core groups, Grayson County, they've broken them down into subgroups, and one of those is the letter to the editor, the outreach, which is broken down from, we have people in the outreach doing the Democratic message, and also the people working on that independent message. And furthermore, we have people setting up events that's inviting Anthony to your community and getting him into like senior citizens meetings or Rotary Kiwanis, things like that. So there's something for everyone in each of these core groups. And you don't have to be a part of the core. Like if you feel like you just can't give that regularly of your time, then you can be just a regular just helper on the campaign, and that's fine. But we really need people who are interested in the core, so that you can be helping as little or as much as you want, but if you're just committed and you're making an effort, that's what really matters for our volunteer strategy. But I'm not sure if there's anything else.
That's great, and I'll just add to that the idea is that the local core group will evolve a plan of action. How can we get the word out the most? How can we reach both reach other people that don't now trust the Democrat and motivate our side? How do we do all that? And so your own creativity, your own knowledge of your own community will all come into play. We'll certainly bring some ideas to you, some basic things we want your help with, but you can really, as Brooke said, you can really cater it to your community. And then the basic idea would be, so if I'm coming back and maybe doing 2 or 3 events in Carroll County and Galax in a particular day, what the core group would help do at that point is make sure that the word goes out like crazy, social media, regular media, word of mouth, so that each one of those events, instead of having 15 and 20 and 30 people, have 40 and 60 and 100 people. And so you will be the key to our success, truly. And Brooke will be the one who is coordinating and managing all 26 core groups. So they have to be mostly self-directed and autonomous with plenty of help and input. But you got to kind of grab it and say, we're going to make this happen on our own. And then if you have a question or a concern, we've already had some issues arisen in the Grayson County committee, just some differences of opinion about how to approach something, and so we had a call with staff and worked it out. So I think we're very excited about this plan. So if you haven't already told Brooke that you'd like to be part of the core group, but you're willing, please do so. And the only other thing I'll say is about fundraising. So we also need money. We had a really interesting conversation with the young man who worked on my campaign in 12, who ran Chris Hurst's successful campaign, who just won, I can't remember the district number for Hurst's campaign. 5th? Is it 5th? I think that's right. And it's just, they had so many interesting ways that they mobilize young people. So we learned a lot. But one thing that was sobering was that in that state delegate race, they raised $1.3 million. Now that was a very high profile race, and a big bunch of money came in from the state, more so than they would have had. But what that made us think is that we got a lot of money to raise. So I want to say 2 things about that. One is, if you know people of significant means, the federally allowable limit that an individual can give to a single candidate is $2,700 per election cycle. My guess, most of the people I know can't do that. But there are people in the 9th District that can, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. So that's what you can give during the primary, and you can do it again in the general election. So if you know people that you think would host a house party, in which some people of means would be part of it, please be thinking about that. It doesn't mean it has to only be well-to-do people, but that's very important. And then we have this grassroots part of our strategy, which is like public radio, where we're saying to everybody that probably almost everybody can give something. And maybe you can't write a check for $1,000 or $500 or even $100 at once, but maybe you could have $15 or $20 or $25 a month going to the campaign. Because when we did the math on that, it doesn't take very many people, about 100 per jurisdiction, giving an average of $20 a month, and it adds up to $600,000 between now and the next election. So we're really emphasizing that as well, so that students, people on fixed incomes, people of modest means, who may think, I don't have the money to give to a campaign, maybe if they just give that $5 or $10 or $20 a month, that too will add up, and they'll have, as we say these days, skin in the game. So if you're given a little bit, you're more likely to do the other stuff. Turn out for an event, talk to a neighbor, whatever else. So please think about that for yourselves and your own giving strategy, but also think about that when you're talking to friends and neighbors and colleagues who might be supportive but feel like they can't contribute. Because we need tremendous volunteer response and a big chunk of money to win this campaign. There's no avoiding that. We can't not have money and do it only on volunteers. Yes?
So the ongoing gift can be established at your website?
Yes. So the cards that are there that have the website kind of in highlighted in yellow, I would encourage you, if you haven't been, even if you're not a big techie type like I'm not, still the website is a great place to go. If you signed up tonight, let me mention to you, those are the cards Brooke is showing there. You can go to that website. You'll learn a lot more about the issues in depth. We're going to do a bi-weekly newsletter. Another one's coming out soon. I'll be doing periodic posts. Our videos are up there, and you can sign up to volunteer and you can make your monthly contribution or one time. If you prefer to write a check, if you think you know others that might want to write a check, take one of the contribution envelopes in the little form that you need to fill out. That would be great as well.
The video
Yeah, right there. Thank you. Yeah. Please.
What you're suggesting, the Bernie Sanders model?
It is very similar to the Bernie Sanders model, yes. Bernie's model was a little bit more based on what a lot of campaigns are now, which is sort of relentless pushing for small donations, because they had tens of millions of people on their lists, and so they could keep hammering away at $3, $5, the $27 figure. We don't have that to draw on, so what we need is a group of people that sign up soon and commit to that monthly donation. We have some people already giving $100 a month, some giving 10, and everything in between. So it is like that, but it's more kind of signing up for it. I really want to avoid haranguing you with fundraising emails. If you help get me in Congress, I don't want to spend 60 or 70% of my time on the phone raising money, which is what the average elected official does now. Because that's had so many bad consequences. They're not spending much time on our issues, and they're not talking to each other. That's part of why we're so polarized. The only way we're going to get away from that is when I get into Congress, is that the people that gave to me to get me there keep giving on a sort of regular monthly or quarterly basis, so that I only have to spend maybe 20% of my time raising money. So it's a model that we hope would carry in to actual term as a congressperson. It's been a substantial amount of time. I appreciate you giving us all this time. We do have, again, some of the materials if you want to pick up the Rural Platform or the Roanoke Times bits. If you want to get a book, I wouldn't object. And mostly, please do sign up, get the information you need, get bumper stickers. Those little cards, we're printing them by the thousands. If you have 5 or 10 people that you think might be interested in hearing about this campaign, take some extra cards, give them to your friends. Same with the bumper stickers. Thank you all so much.